Chapter 11. An Unexpected Visitor. It was past 10 o'clock at night when Tom finally left Susie in the little kitchen of Kinghordy House. She couldn't stay in the hospital with Charlie, so Tom had driven her back. How kind and helpful Tom is, she thought. She sat down at the table and looked at the white walls, the cupboards, the table, the fridge. Nothing moved. She felt strange in the thick quietness without Charlie. In London, she didn't mind being alone, but here, in this house, she was uncomfortable. She knew she was afraid. Now Charlie was in hospital with a broken leg and a broken arm. He was lucky not to have a broken neck. Poor Charlie. They said he had to stay in hospital for at least a week. Poor me, too, she thought. What am I going to do now? I haven't got a car. Whose idea was it to have a holiday anyway? What a wonderful holiday this is. Here I am, in this house by myself, on a cold, wet Welsh mountain in the middle of nowhere. I can't even walk to Llandafed from here. There's no one near, and what if... She stopped quickly before she could finish that thought. Well, anyway, I've got my mobile phone, and at least there's Tom, she told herself. He's been very kind. Tom had told her that he lived on the other side of the hill. She could ring him any time if she needed anything. He would try to come the next morning to see her, but he had a lot to do, and he wasn't sure if he'd have time. Anyway, she could call a taxi from Llandafed to take her to the hospital. She felt safer, thinking of Tom. She remembered the gun that she'd seen in his Land Rover. When he'd shown her the silver bullet, she hadn't understood at first. Then she had remembered the stories her father used to tell her. Tom didn't really think that a werewolf was killing his sheep. Did he? She had asked him if he was joking, but he had just smiled and said, "You never know, do you? You can't be sure." She couldn't believe he was serious. "Where my father came from," she'd told him lightly, "they believe that when a werewolf dies it turns into a vampire. You can't kill them, you know. It's impossible. They just change into something else." "Do they really?" Tom had said. Of course it's stupid, she told herself now. Vampires and werewolves are just stories. She got up to look at the fire in the sitting room. She thought of the time on Bryn Mawr Hill and the time at the zoo. But the danger wasn't real. There was nothing out there. It was only in her head, and she must fight it. She wished Charlie was there. "Oh, no," she said aloud. The fire had gone out. That meant no hot water, and the house was cold now, too. And, of course, there was no wood in the box either. "Okay," she thought. "Let's see if I can do this by myself." She picked up the wood box and opened the front door. She left the door open so that she could see a little and went out to the garage. When the wood box was full, she stood up again to go back inside. Just then, she suddenly realized that someone or something was near her and was moving towards her in the dark. She screamed and dropped the box. Pieces of wood fell everywhere. She stood still and couldn't move. "Oh, I'm terribly sorry," a friendly voice said. She knew the voice at once. It was Richard, the man from the pub. "I made you jump, didn't I?" he went on. "I just came to see if you were okay. I thought you might need something. Tom told me it was you two who were in the accident. I saw it on my way to the pub earlier tonight. He made it sound like a question. "Yes," Susie said. "I know. I saw it was you. It's kind of you to come. I'm fine, but Charlie's in hospital with a broken arm and a broken leg. Some holiday."
"I'm so sorry. Poor Charlie," Richard said. "Here, let me help you pick up the wood."
"Thanks," Susie said. She added, "I didn't hear you drive up or anything."
"No, I walked the last bit," Richard answered. "The snow's quite bad on this road, and I didn't want to have any trouble with the car. I haven't got a Land Rover like the farmers round here."
"Well, would you like to come in?" Susie said, unsure what to do. He could help her with the fire anyway, and it would be nice to talk to someone for a bit. She made them both a cup of tea while Richard lit the fire. The room soon started to feel warmer. Susie found herself talking to Richard as if he was an old friend. She told him about her life in London, her father, her family in Slovenia, her work. While she talked, he smiled at her and listened. She'd never talked like this before to a man she didn't know. He made her feel that everything she said was important and interesting. She realized that he was very good-looking, in an unusual way. His blue eyes watched her while she spoke. It was strange how comfortable she felt. He was so easy to talk to. She might almost fall in love with him. Suddenly, Susie realized what she was doing. Charlie was in hospital, and here she was with a strange man in the house. How could she possibly be thinking of such a thing? I'm afraid I'll have to go to bed now," Susie said.
"Of course, I'm terribly sorry. How stupid of me. It's late," Richard said. "You must be very tired. I'd better go. Look, if you like, I could take you into the hospital to see Charlie tomorrow. I've got to go into town anyway."
"Oh, well, that's very kind. Yes, please," Susie said.
"I'll come and pick you up about 12, then," Richard said.
"Oh, that would be wonderful. Thanks very much. See you tomorrow," she replied. When Susie got into bed, she realized that she was very tired. But in the night, the dream started again. A voice called to her. "Come with me," it said. In the dream she knew the voice, but she couldn't quite say whose it was. Suddenly she was awake. Outside there was a kind of scream. "It must be an animal, caught by something," Susie thought. It came again, and then again, a hopeless, deathly scream. She pulled the blankets over her head to shut out the noise. Chapter 12. Richard's House. Looking out of her window the next morning, Susie saw that dark bits of grass were showing above the snow on the fields. On the road the snow was quite thin. It wasn't as bad as she'd thought last night. She remembered that Richard was coming later to take her to the hospital. He would be able to drive right up to her house this time. She phoned the hospital. The nurse said Charlie was fine, but he'd had an uncomfortable night. Susie told the nurse she would go to visit him later. She was not sure when. Her phone rang. "Hello, my dear," a woman's voice said. "It's Catherine Lloyd. I'm Tom's wife. Tom asked me to call you. I'm afraid Tom's had to go out. He won't be able to come up to your house this morning. Are you all right now? Do you need anything?" "No, it's okay," Susie said. "I'm fine. I'm going into the hospital later. Richard is going to take me." "Richard?" Catherine asked. "Yes," Susie said, realising that she didn't know Richard's family name. Tom knows him. He's new in the village, Tom said. Anyway, Richard saw the accident, and he came here last night to see if we were all right." "Ah, that was kind of him," Catherine said. "Well, that's okay then." Richard arrived at about midday, as he had said he would. "Hello there," he said, smiling. "How are you?" "Fine," Susie replied. She was pleased to see him. "Let's go then, shall we?" he said. "I'm afraid I forgot to bring my wallet with me, so we'll have to go back to my house. Do you mind? It's not far. In fact, the house is only about 1 kilometre from here, over the hill. By road, you have to go back down to the main road and take the next turning, but it doesn't take very long." "No problem," Susie said. "Anyway, I'll show you my house. I'm sure you'll find it interesting." "Oh?" Susie wanted to know more. "Yes," Richard talked on, smiling warmly at Susie. "Actually, it used to be my family's house a long time ago. When I came here for a visit one day, I found that the person who owned it wanted to sell it. I decided to buy it immediately." "Oh, so where did you live before then?" Susie asked. "Well, Europe for a number of years. I was there on business. But I got tired of always moving and living out of a suitcase. I decided to stop working for a bit. I'd made enough money not to have to, and I've got enough to spend some on the house, too." "How nice," Susie said, thinking how nice it would be not to have to work. But she wouldn't want to live on top of a Welsh mountain for the rest of her life. Too quiet, no one around to speak to. "Oh, look," she said, as they passed a group of men in dark jackets, standing by the side of the road. They wore hats and boots and were carrying guns. They were looking across a field towards some woods. "Do you think they're hunting for the beast of Bryn Mawr?" She smiled at Richard. "Probably," he said. "But I don't think they'll find it at this time of day, do you?" "No," she agreed, laughing. "It's probably asleep somewhere." They drove round a corner, and Richard said, "There it is." "Oh, goodness!" Susie cried. "For a moment I thought you meant the beast. Is that really your house?" Ahead of them, at the end of the road, she saw a beautiful stone building. There were 10 windows on the top floor and 8 on the ground floor. In the centre was a large front door with a pretty roof over it. It was a very big house, built in the 18th century, probably, Susie thought. It must be the house of a rich family. She hadn't expected this. "Yes, it needs a lot of work," Richard said. "Does it?" Susie replied. And as they got closer, she could see that many of the windows had no glass. The front wall of the house seemed to be all that was there. If the wind blew, it might just fall down, like a building made of cards. "So you're actually living here?" she asked. "Well, yes, there are a couple of rooms that are okay," Richard said. "It's not very comfortable, but I don't mind." He stopped by the front door, and they got out. "Come on," he said. "I'll show you round." Going through the great front door, Susie found herself in a large room with a stone floor. Some stairs led up to the first floor, but large holes showed where several steps were missing. Richard smiled. "I don't think we'll try that way. Follow me." He led her through several large rooms. Everywhere there were stones and dirt. "Nearly there," Richard said. They seemed to be walking for ages. Susie felt a drop of water on her head. She looked up. She could see the sky through the holes in the roof. They went up some narrow stairs, past glassless windows which looked down over the road. Finally, Richard opened a door into a room which felt quite warm. A fire was burning, and there were chairs and a sofa.
"Have a seat," Richard said. "Would you like some coffee?"
Really, Susie wanted to get to the hospital to see Charlie. What should she say?
"I've just remembered something else that I haven't done," Richard said before she could answer. "I'm sorry. It's going to take me a moment or two. Why don't you sit down? I'll bring you some coffee while you wait. Then we'll get going again, okay?"
He looked at her. "Well, okay then. Yes, some coffee would be great," Susie said, sitting on one of the rather dirty chairs near the fire. Richard went out, and Susie looked around her. On the dark wood walls there were large pictures of men and women from years ago. There was a man who looked a little like Richard, she realized. Were these people his family? She felt uncomfortable with all these dead people looking at her. They made her think of the pictures in horror films, where the eyes move. She laughed at herself. Perhaps she should phone the hospital again. She could tell them that she would be in to see Charlie very soon. She opened her handbag. "Oh, I'm so stupid," she said to herself. The phone was not there. Of course, she'd left it on the kitchen table in Kinghordy House. Richard came back with her coffee. Giving her the cup, he went to stand with his back to the fire. "Thanks," Susie said. Do you have a phone I could use to phone the hospital?"
"No,"
he almost shouted.
"There's no phone here."
Then he became quiet. His face had lost the friendly smile. He seemed to be waiting for something. Suddenly, everything had changed. The room was deathly quiet. Susie looked at the fire and drank her coffee. A strange light came into Richard's blue eyes as he watched Susie drink. She started to feel very sleepy, and she sat back on the chair. Her eyes were closing. She tried hard to keep them open. Richard stood still in front of the fire. She saw that he was wearing a large black belt with silver on it. She looked up at Richard's face. "He's got a beard," she thought to herself. "That's strange. He didn't have one before." Then the dream started. She's looking at the dark, deathly thing that has been following her in her dreams all this time. The face is hidden. A hand takes hers. She knows very well whose it is. She feels terribly afraid. "You're one of us. You know that, don't you?" She knows the voice as well as her own. "No, I'm not. I will not listen to you. I will not," she cries. "I knew when you came here. You came to find me, didn't you?" The voice continues. It will not stop. "No, no, I didn't. I don't know you," she says. "Take me to Charlie, please. Please." "You don't really want Charlie," the voice tells her. "You're mine. You know that in your heart." And she feels herself beginning to move towards him. He's right, perhaps. She will do anything he wants. She cannot stop herself.